What began as a debate over museums quickly turned into a much broader argument about history, politics, and who should decide what Americans learn about their past. Congressman Maxwell Frost challenged Heritage Foundation witness Mike Gonzalez, but the hearing didn't end there. The final exchange drew one of the strongest historical comparisons heard that day.
I've been in these museums. I mean, talking about the National Museum of African American History and Culture specifically, it tells the whole story. The ugly and how America and Americans came together to get rid of slavery, to fight Jim Crow. But it tells the whole story. So maybe this committee should do like a field trip and actually go through these institutions to actually see the full story be told, because I would contend that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have never stepped foot in many of these institutions, at least not in a long time. Mr. Gonzalez, are you a professional historian?
Actually, I have been paid by publishers to write history, so I am.
Okay, how many exhibits have you curated?
Oh, no, I'm not a curator.
Okay, how many exhibits have you curated? It's a separate question.
I haven't curated any exhibits
Okay,
because I'm not a curator.
Dr. Hartig, thank you. You haven't curated any exhibits, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Hartig, is your work partisan?
No, sir, our work is not. We don't seek to advance any political agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Does the museum take political sides or have a political agenda?
No, sir.
Does the museum have exhibits that challenge people's views or may make them feel uncomfortable?
History is incredibly challenging, and by then its very nature, if we tell it in its richness, we absolutely, I think, have objects that can make people uncomfortable. And, you know, I hearken back to Secretary Bunch's words that he was told by a sharecropper that, you know, tell the people both what they want to hear and what they need to hear. So I think depending on where you are, certainly there can be a level of discomfort.
Thank you. What review process does the museum use before opening an exhibit?
So the museum goes through a rigorous scholarly presentation of the way in which exhibit objects and stories and interpretation relate to one another. That's reviewed extensively, also depending on the size of the exhibit. Our In Pursuit of Life, Liberty, and Happiness exhibition, our 250 object exhibition for America 250, went through exhaustive review with also peer reviews as well. Then it is presented up to the undersecretaries and often the secretary in conversation with our review. Thank you,
Director. Mr. Gonzalez, who should decide what's in a museum?
I would say that the curator, but also overseen by the leadership of the museum. The taxpayer does spend $1.1 billion in the Smithsonian, so the Smithsonian is accountable to the American taxpayer.
All right, thank you. I have a yes or no question. Should exhibits capture American history as it happened without bias?
Yes.
Was slavery a part of American history?
Yes.
Was Jim Crow a part of American history?
Yes.
Is it important that museums discuss these topics at length so people understand the gravity?
Absolutely yes.
Do you believe that American art should be consistent with the Trump administration's cultural and political goals?
I have no idea what that is. I cannot comment on that.
Do you believe that American art, or do you believe that the Smithsonian's goals should be consistent with the Trump's administration's cultural and political goals?
I don't know how you define that. I cannot answer it.
You seem to have a long-standing personal vendetta against the Smithsonian that started well before the White House report. And I ask you those questions because I'm concerned about censorship. I'm no historian either, just like you. But I know that Nazi Germany weaponized art and museums to demonize certain groups. Dr. Blight, if Congress or the White House starts deciding historical interpretation, how is that different from political censorship?
It is political censorship. Their model may indeed be Joseph Goebbels' Committee on Enlightenment, which is what the Nazis called their committee that tried to control museums.
I'm sorry,
Thank
sir.
you. I yield back.
Over the past several weeks, the Smithsonian Institution has become the focus of an increasingly heated national debate over how American history should be presented in federally funded museums. In March 2026, President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 14253 titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, directing a review of Smithsonian exhibits. That review culminated in the White House Domestic Policy Council's July 2026 report, Saving America's Story, which argues that portions of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History have adopted an ideological approach that emphasizes America's failures over its achievements and recommends reforms to restore what the administration describes as a more balanced and patriotic presentation of U.S. history. Those developments became the backdrop for the July 21, 2026 House Oversight and Government Reform Committee hearing, titled Rewriting American History, examining the Smithsonian's efforts to reshape the past. The hearing was not simply about one museum exhibit. It became part of a larger national debate over historical interpretation, government oversight, and academic independence. It was against that backdrop that Congressman Maxwell Frost took his turn to question the witnesses. Rather than beginning with politics, Frost challenged the very premise of the criticism directed toward the Smithsonian. He suggested that some of the institution's strongest critics should actually visit the museums before judging them. Referring specifically to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Frost argued that the museum tells America's complete story, its triumphs as well as its failures. According to him, acknowledging slavery, segregation, and racial discrimination does not diminish American history. Instead, it helps explain how the nation has evolved through struggle, reform, and progress. To support that argument, Frost questioned Dr. Anthea Hardig, director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Rather than asking political questions, he focused first on her qualifications and professional experience. Hardig explained that she has spent her career working in archives, historical preservation, museum leadership, and public history. She described the museum's mission as serving the American people through scholarship, evidence, and historical research, rather than promoting any political ideology. One of the most significant moments of the hearing came when Frost asked whether museums should sometimes make visitors uncomfortable. Hardig answered without hesitation that history itself can be uncomfortable because real historical events are often painful. She explained that museums have a responsibility not only to tell visitors what they want to hear, but also what they need to hear. In her view, presenting difficult historical subjects honestly is an essential part of preserving the nation's history rather than rewriting it. Frost then shifted his attention to Heritage Foundation senior fellow Mike Gonzalez, whose testimony reflected many of the concerns raised in the White House report. Frost questioned Gonzalez about his experience with museum curation before moving to broader questions about historical interpretation. Gonzalez acknowledged that slavery, Jim Crow, and other difficult chapters are unquestionably important parts of American history. However, he also emphasized that because the Smithsonian receives billions of dollars in taxpayer support, Congress has both the authority and responsibility to ensure those institutions remain accountable to the American public. That exchange highlighted the central disagreement running throughout the hearing. Both sides agreed that difficult historical events belong in museums. The disagreement centered on who should determine how those events are presented. Frost argued that historians, curators, and scholars should make those decisions using professional historical standards. Others on the committee argued that elected officials have a legitimate oversight role whenever taxpayer-funded institutions appear to promote one political perspective over another. As the questioning continued, Frost raised concerns about political influence over cultural institutions. He asked whether museums or American art should be expected to reflect the cultural priorities of any presidential administration. Gonzalez declined to answer directly, explaining that he could not define those goals precisely enough to respond. Frost argued that if government officials begin deciding how history should be interpreted, the line between oversight and censorship becomes increasingly blurred. The hearing reached its most dramatic moment during Frost's closing exchange with historian David Blight. Frost referred to historical examples in which authoritarian governments controlled museums and cultural institutions to shape public opinion. He then asked Blight how government-directed historical interpretation differs from political censorship. Blight answered directly that such actions constitute political censorship. That response immediately became one of the most widely discussed moments of the hearing because it transformed the discussion from museum exhibits into a broader debate about democracy, academic freedom, and government influence over historical scholarship. Supporters of stronger congressional oversight argue that taxpayers deserve confidence that federally funded museums present American history fairly, accurately, and without ideological bias. They believe Congress has every right to examine institutions that receive public funding. Critics, however, argue that while Congress should oversee budgets and administration, political leaders should not determine scholarly conclusions or influence how professional historians interpret evidence. They warn that political involvement in historical interpretation could undermine public confidence in museums and weaken academic independence. Ultimately, this hearing reflected far more than a disagreement over museum exhibits. It highlighted two competing visions of how America should preserve and present its own history. One side believes greater oversight is necessary to ensure national institutions reflect the country's founding ideals and achievements. The other believes historical scholarship must remain independent of political influence, even when that scholarship presents uncomfortable truths. As Congress continues examining the Smithsonian and the institution continues defending its curatorial process, this debate is likely to remain at the center of broader national conversations about education, public memory, cultural institutions, and the role government should play in shaping how future generations understand American history.